They say children can see things we can't. We found a place where they all saw the same thing. Paranormal M investigated. Subscribe to hear what they saw and what's still there. The story of the haunted museum in my hometown. In 2022, my friend and I developed an interest in ghosts. Our town and the surrounding area had two stories that stuck out when it came to ghosts. The first one that most people knew about was the Ghost Road. I'll not get too much into that story, although it is very interesting. But it was mostly just a tradition in our sort of town during Halloween to get people spooked out. The second story was a little bit less known, but if you were a child in school, you would have heard about it. Our town has a historical museum. It showcases our town's history. It's a very old building, and it's full of artifacts and items from our town over many years. In late elementary school, everybody would take a field trip, and they'd go and get ice cream after. While there, you would hear about the story of Abigail, the ghost. The story goes that Abigail was a 17-year-old girl who stood up on a prom date and died of a broken heart. This was just a story that the museum curator would say to spook the kids, which it did. But it was also a story to go along with the strange things that would happen in the museum. The museum curator explained that a room on the second floor of the building, now called Abigail's room, would have the light on in the middle of the night with no one there. And the building is right across our town courthouse. The police would often call the museum curator and ask if anybody was in the building, fearing a break-in had happened. No one was ever in the building. I had some simple ghost equipment that I had bought online. Cheap EMF reader, a spirit box, and a twist-on flashlight. My friend had gotten a hold of me, explaining that he was interested in contacting the museum curator about doing a ghost investigation at the museum. My friend and a few other friends and I had a meeting with her. Without much convincing at all, she agreed to our coming late at night and doing our own investigation. A few days later, we started our investigation. We started by sitting at the large table together with the museum curator, coming up with a game plan. We started with the EMF reader and the spirit box in the kitchen area. We didn't get much, but we got some audio that was not very clear and could not be ruled out as supernatural. We moved through the house and the stairwell. We got some spikes in the EMF, and I don't see a spike from an EMF I bought off Amazon as concrete proof as it being a supernatural thing. But it was definitely exciting. We moved to the second floor after going up an old spiral staircase. The first room was filled with old artifacts from the early 1900s. We moved through some rooms and got some voices on the spirit box and EMF spikes, but nothing too convincing. That was until we moved to the back room. The back room was small, filled with dresses and clothing. We decided to set the flashlight down, twist it barely on so with any touch it could turn on and off, but not so touchy that a footstep or a gust of air could mess with it. The first thing we asked was, if there's anything here with us, can you please turn on the flashlight? Instantly, the flashlight turned on, and we were all in shock. Can you please turn off the flashlight for us? Immediately it turned off, and we would ask many questions, and this was several years ago, and I can't remember them. And every question would be met with the flashlight's reps nodding. There was no time during the flashlight experiment that it would turn on or off without question, or being asked a question. We spent around 30 minutes talking to it before moving to the basement. The basement felt extremely off. We didn't get much from the EMF or spirit box, but the flashlight worked extremely well. We would ask questions down there, asking if this was the same spirit, and it responded that it was not. This spirit did not answer every question like the one before. It was only asking a few questions with a yes. Or answering, I'm sure. These questions were, are you a different spirit? Or are you an evil spirit? And a question that ended up with us deciding to leave. Do you want to hurt us? After hearing that the spirit was not too fond of you, we ended up leaving that night. We had done a few more investigations there, not learning anything new. The last day we went, we sat down with the museum curator, explained to us that maybe we could make some money off of this. Maybe we could do something with it, maybe during Halloween. After this discussion in the museum, our investigations never came back with anything. No flashlight turning on or off, and no EMF and no spirit box. Later, my friend would see the museum curator at the store and speak with her. She explained that the whole investigation at the museum changed how she thought about everything. This was one of the 2 houses that I'd investigated in my town. The other building I'd investigated was much more exciting. It scared me for a long time. It was previously an adult daycare building. Had been reported haunted through the years it was open. And I can assure you it was still haunted when we investigated it. If anybody'd like that story, I'll gladly tell that one as well. Has anybody else had any similar experiences, and does anybody else use the flashlights? My second haunted building investigation. The adult foster care backstory. I had a close friend at the time, whose mom used to have a few houses owned for her adult foster care business. They would take care of the adults, but couldn't take care of themselves on their own. One of their buildings was a building right in my town. I'd explained to my friend and her mom that I've gotten into ghost investigations. I told them about the story of my investigation at the town's museum. After telling them about my investigation, they told me some stories of their own at one of their adult foster care homes. It was now empty due to them not continuing the business. The adult foster care home they were talking about had around 7 bedrooms and a living area and a kitchen, a massive basement. There were 5 bedrooms that were used for residents that needed to be taken care of. 1 bedroom that was more of an office to keep track of records, and an attendance room where the staff would stay the night. Residents who lived there often spent their last moments of life there, became very close to some of the staff. While staying in this home, the staff had some stories of their own. One of the most common occurrences were the sounds of steps in the hall, and when I say steps, I mean full sprinting down the hall. The staff would often be woken by the sounds of running, and at first, they assumed one of the residents was up from bed making the noise. Although it was strange that any of the residents would be running, staff would check all bedrooms and find all residents asleep. And this is when they started to be concerned. Most nights would have this heavy sprinting down the long hall that was kind of sandwiched between residents' rooms, which would again be followed up by bed checks that didn't give the slightest hint of a resident being out of bed. This is when the staff would throw around the word ghost. My friend, who would often be around at this house, had some other stories as well. There is always a fear of walking down the steps to the basement. And that being said, who's not afraid of walking down a creepy, unfinished basement? But she always had a strange feeling going down those steps. And any time she had to, she was sure to take out her phone, then go to her camera and make sure she could see behind her. I'm sure the story from another staff member about the sounds of a child crying from the basement didn't help. A staff member ended up having to call their shift early, after in the middle of the day hearing a child squeaking and crying from the basement. From the sounds of running in the halls to the constant feeling of being watched, to children's screams coming from the basement, the staff had every reason to throw around the word ghost. After hearing all these stories, I needed to check it out myself. My friend's mom was selling the house and had it all completely cleared out, which left the perfect opportunity to investigate the place. I contacted my friend Logan. They'd been with me during the investigation of the museum. We set up a day to visit the home at night. We truly did not know how crazy this investigation would get. From our flashlight method working, the spirit box spouting out new conversations and actual physical noise, it absolutely blew our last investigation out of the water. I appreciate the few people who read my last post. It was very nice seeing an interest in my story. I want to give some background on why we felt the need to do an investigation on this house before I wrote about the actual investigation. I ended up with 2 investigations at this home. One with my friend Logan and a few other friends who joined the last investigation, and another with my friend and her mom who owned the home. Both investigations gave incredible results. So incredible that I actually have not done an investigation in over a year now because of it. I'm very excited to tell the story of contacting residents who used to actually live there or passed, and even tell about one entity that gave me literal chills. I would like to say, if anybody has any doubts, I welcome any of them. I'll do my absolute best to show proof for my stories. In my last post, I linked a news article that my town published about the experience to show that it actually did happen. For the next story, I have some video evidence to go with it. I'll not be able to show too much of the videos out of respect for the other people in them, but I will do my best to show all the evidence that I have. Thank you very much for taking the time to read my post. You're welcome. And if you want to message me about anything, feel absolutely free. I had somebody contact me on my last post about using my story for their YouTube channel. If anybody else would like to do something similar, you absolutely have my permission to. If you could just go ahead and let me know beforehand and send me a link to whatever, that'd be awesome. I love being able to share my stories, and I'm also open to any interviews and questioning. Ghost at Work. True story. This happened about 4 years ago. I was working in a popular jewelry shop in a shopping center. It was a late shift, probably 8:30 or 9. There was me and 2 other staff members on shift. A bit of background for the story. When you're in your shop, the only way to enter is the only way to enter the staff area. It's through one door. You can get to the small office through here, which has 2 doors. One that leads to a walkway to the toilet and onto the shop floor, and another that leads to the storage area. The storage area has automatic lights that can only turn on when you walk into the room. I was on the shift with 2 other women. Went out into the office to return some jewelry when I saw a woman's face looking back at me from behind the door of the storage area. And I could see about 3/4 of her face. The rest was covered with the door. Her facial expression was very still. She wasn't smiling, and she had an angry expression. She was staring at me. I looked away confused, then looked back, and she was gone. The lights in the storage room were still off, which confused me, so I walked toward the room thinking it was one of my coworkers. As I started approaching the door, a loud crash sound came from behind me. I looked back at where it was coming from, thinking a tray of maybe charms had fallen or something. The tray we keep the charms and jewelry in aren't sealed. They're open at the top, and if you dropped, they could go everywhere. Trust me, I know from experience. When I looked behind me, the charms are all still on the shelf in their trays. I instantly got a sinking feeling because nothing had been moved. I then backed out of the office and went to the shop floor. That's where both my colleagues were. You know, it wasn't my colleagues because if they'd come into our office, I would have seen them as the doors next to the office. And there was no explanation for what happened or who the lady I saw was, or what made the noise. So what do you guys think? Ouija board gone wrong. When she was about 17, she and her friends started playing with the Ouija board, as many curious and reckless teenagers do. At first, they asked silly, trivial questions, and to their surprise, the board would respond with accurate answers. Then they moved on to asking about boys they liked and crushes and relationships. Typical teenage stuff. After a few nights, they started to ask deeper, more unsettling questions. They asked who or what they were talking to. Sometimes the board would say something like, "I'm a woman who lived in the 1850s. Other times it claimed to be like a 13-year-old boy who died in the 70s. The answers were inconsistent, but oddly it always felt like the same presence. Eventually, they asked why the entity kept changing, and the board spelled out, "I'm whoever I want to be. Today I can be an old man, tomorrow a child." At that point, they started to feel seriously uneasy, like they were no longer dealing with something innocent or random. It implied something powerful, maybe even evil. One night they asked, "How do you take people?" And the board answered, "By choking them." That's fun. Not. That was when fear really set in. They decided to stop playing, and sometime shortly after, my ex-wife came home one evening to find that her parents and or younger brother had gone out to a party. They wouldn't be home for a few hours, and she didn't want to be alone in her room where the Ouija board was. So she stayed in her parents' bedroom instead, waiting for them to return. She turned on all the lights in the house, and this was the early 90s, so no cell phones. She lay in the bed watching TV, trying to distract herself. After a while, she noticed a hallway light turning off by itself that had never happened in her house before. She was terrified, but got up and turned it back on. As soon as she laid back down, it turned off again. Her mom kept a Bible on the nightstand, so she grabbed it and opened up a random page and began reading out loud. Suddenly, she felt overwhelmingly tired, so much so that she could barely keep her eyes open. She tried to fight it, and she turned the TV volume up and kept reading, but eventually dozed off. She woke up minutes later to find the Bible no longer in her hands, but beside her. She grabbed it again and kept reading. I always asked her why she didn't just run outside, but she said she was too scared to leave the room to run down that dark hallway. Eventually, she fell asleep again, only to wake up to a terrifying sensation. Something was grabbing her ankles. She felt it moving slowly up her legs and over her shins and her thighs and her waist until it reached her throat, and then it began choking her. The lights were still on, but there was nothing visible in front of her. She said she started kicking and gasping and struggling, and she remembered her mom also had a crucifix in the nightstand. She wrestled her way to the drawer and found it, clutched it to her chest, and started praying. "Please, God, help me. I swear I'll never play with that thing again." And then, whatever was choking her suddenly let go. She ran out of the house and waited by the curb until her parents came home. When she told them what happened, they dismissed it as a nightmare. Still, she was so shaken she refused to sleep alone and spent the night in her parents' bed. The next day, exhausted from lack of sleep, she tried to nap in her room around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Not long after lying down, she felt something tugging at the foot of her blanket. She assumed it was her dog until it persisted. When she looked up, she saw what she can only describe as a boy around 8 to 10 years old, but no taller than 18 inches. He had a child's face, but his body was small, proportioned like an adult in miniature. He stood at the foot of her bed just staring. No smile, no expression. His dark hair was neatly combed to the side, and he wore a one-piece garment, almost like a toga. She was so shocked she couldn't scream. And after a few seconds, the small figure walked into her closet. She bolted from the room and ran to her parents. Again, they didn't believe her. Her dad checked the closet and there was nothing. And that night, while trying to sleep, the closet door slowly opened, just a few inches. Nothing came out, but it moved. She ran to her parents' room again, and the next day before going to bed, she tied the closet door shut with a cable. That night, she heard the doors slowly tugging, then violently shaking, like something trapped inside. The following day, one of the girls that she had played the Ouija board with, she came over. She wanted to ask the board something about her boyfriend, suspecting that he was cheating. My ex told her, "No, something really bad happened. I don't want it here anymore. Please take it." But the friend begged, just one more time. Reluctantly, my ex agreed. They sat down, placed their hands on the planchette, and before they could even ask a question, the board began spelling out my ex's name. "Pamela, remember your promise to God. Don't break it, because next time I'll take you." And that was the last straw. She threw the board away. Years later, when I first met her, she still lived in that house, and she actually showed me the closet handles where she had tied the cables. You could see the wear and the scratch marks, like something had been trying to force its way out. For years, she refused to watch horror movies or even hear the word Ouija. For a long time, we slept with the lamp on just in case. After she got rid of the board, nothing else ever happened, but the fear stayed with her. Visitation Dream. This story happened this past December 2024. But to preface the story, my husband's grandparents had a very weird relationship. They'd been together since they were 18 and were married for 50 years. They were not very lovey-dovey. My husband's grandmother had been bedridden for about 2.5 years. They were in kidney failure. We just found out recently that she was not a candidate for dialysis. She wasn't able to do anything for herself, and my husband's grandfather had been her caregiver during this time. We set her hospital bed up in the kitchen, and she was happy to just be home. Me and my husband had been staying with his grandparents and aunt and uncle. They all lived together on their couch for about 2 weeks, after moving from the other side of the duplex after a disagreement with his great aunt who lived on the other side. And his grandfather was in the process of clearing out the spare room upstairs for us. And one day he finally did, so we got all of our stuff in there, and he had made a nice pork roast dinner. He was in a great mood that night. We all had a glass of eggnog together and went to bed. The next morning, we all wake up, and my husband goes to work, and around 12:30 that afternoon I got a call from my mother-in-law. They were saying that she had found my husband's grandfather dead in the driveway. He had had a massive heart attack while going to take her dog on a walk. Damn. The only reason that my mother-in-law had found him was because the doors to her car were locked, which he never locks. She ended up locking her keys in the car, and he had given her a spare key, but she didn't know where he was. So we left work, and my husband and most of his family went to the hospital to go deal with all of that. I was at the house with his grandmother. When everybody arrived home, we told her that he was gone and cried together, and then some of us went outside just to get some air. A tree fell in the backyard. His grandmother shared a glass of champagne with us the night in memory of his grandfather. That night was the second night that we kind of swept in the spare room, which I will assume is slept. My husband woke up the next morning. He looks at me. He said that he'd be right back, so he went to his grandfather's room. Was looking for something. He comes back empty-handed. Tells me that in the middle of the night he had a dream that his grandfather had come into our room while we were in there sleeping. Then woke him up and said, "Did you give Mima her Christmas present yet?" My husband was like, "No, we don't know where it is." And my husband's grandfather in the dream said, "Well, the hell are you waiting for? I'll show you where it is." So he goes in there and he sees the present, and it's in a blue box. It's a silver necklace with the words on the box, but fast forward to the next morning, my husband couldn't find it. He was like, oh, okay, maybe it was just a dream. So later that day, my mother-in-law and myself, my husband and his aunt that were all living in the same house, we're all sitting in the living room. My husband mentioned the dream he had, and his aunt says, wait a second, and goes upstairs. She comes downstairs with the blue box that my husband had seen in his dream and says, is this it? Once we actually saw the words it said, and we were in shock. It basically says something along the lines of, to my wife, I didn't marry you because I could live with you. It's because I can't live without you. Which was out of character for him. He's never the type of person to be romantic like that. He was a sailor and spent a lot of time in a sailboat. And he was a major stoner. His aunt said that she was cleaning up his grandfather's room looking for his phone and found it and brought it into her room so it didn't get lost. So the next day his grandmother ends up at the hospital with a severe infection. Wasn't doing great. We brought it to the hospital to give it to his grandmother, and when my husband was giving it to her and telling her about the dream, it felt like grandfather was in the room. I could visualize his grandfather standing behind my husband with his hand on his shoulder. After that we went home, and his aunt called us and said that his grandmother had said that she wanted to go into hospice and be with her husband. So for the next week and a half we visited her, and she never spoke again. She slipped into an almost comatose-like state. She ended up passing away on Christmas Day, right after her youngest grandchild, Eleven, opened the present that she had gotten him. The next day, my husband tells me that he had another dream. And in this dream, we were in the living room and his grandfather was there. But he looked younger, more put together, and he ran up and hugged his grandfather and told him that he missed him. After about a minute of him hugging him, he said that that's enough. I got things to do. So, after that, his grandmother comes walking down the stairs in fancy clothes. They said bye to everyone and left. We lost his grandfather on December 11th, 2024. His grandmother, December 25th, 2024. Exactly 2 weeks to the date. My haunted house. We bought this house 1 year ago today, July 8th. We were told when we came to see the house, the previous owner had died. But it wasn't until we were a week or two away from closing that I found the obituary and read that she had died at her home. Immediately when we moved in, I started seeing things. My 18-year-old daughter said it was haunted from the moment she stepped in. She was not with us when we looked at it, and this was after we had bought it. It started with me seeing what I would say is a woman walking from the dining room to the living room as I went from the living room to the kitchen. It makes a big circle. The house is a tri-level, so the main floor, then stairs that go up to the bathroom and bedrooms. Separate stairs that go downstairs to the walkout basement. And that opens into a utility room and a second bathroom. Also, for moving in, every time I'd go down the stairs from the bedroom, I'd see somebody standing at the other stairs. It's hard to describe this, but there is a window with no glass. Lets you see to the other stairs that go down. A friend has experienced this too, and I haven't happened in months, and nothing has changed. I kept all this to myself, but my husband, who's been a non-believer until recent years, and experiences that sort of changed that, started seeing things. He had a black shadow walk up to him in the bathroom. He thought somebody had came in until he saw it disappear. It freaked him out. And he has seen shadows other times too. I've seen shadows walk by and move doors. The weirdest thing would be seeing what looked like a person reflected in the TV when it was black. It was like somebody bent over looking at the TV very closely, and then they stood straight up and stepped back. And I've seen my husband a few times, and it wasn't him. Woke up, got out of the bed, and he was asleep next to me. So I was trying not to wake him. Started downstairs and realized he was asleep on the couch. Went and checked, and the bed was empty. Newest thing was last night. I had just turned my phone off, and I was just settling to go to sleep. And I wear a sleep mask, so it was on. I felt an arm on my hip and slide across. Took my mask off, rolled over and checked my husband, who was asleep with both arms under his blanket. We had separate ones. I hadn't felt him move, and this is the first time it's touched me. Very weird. Before somebody asks, yes, I have cats, but my door stays shut. They're not allowed in my room. Sorry this is long. It's not even everything that's happened, but a big chunk of it. I should tell some of my other ghost stories sometime. Two short happenings from my childhood home. I believe that the house I grew up in was very haunted. As far as I'm aware, there were no tragedies. It wasn't built on an old graveyard or anything. My family had a solid couple of years of difficult times, and I believe that the negative energy may have invited something in, or at the very least made it stronger. I've posted a few of my own stories before, but I just found out that my other family members have experienced things as well. When my brother was little, probably between 10 and 13, we heard knocking on our back door and garage door at the same time. These doors were on the same bottom floor of the house, probably 20 feet apart max. The only way to get from one to the other was through the house, or all the way around it. For whatever reason, my brother was by the garage door and heard knocking behind it. He immediately assumed it was me or my parents, but when he heard a second knocking on the glass patio door just a few seconds later, he was confused. Nobody in our family would have any reason to knock on these doors. The lock of the garage door was long broken, hardly ever locked the back door. And on top of that, it would have taken at least 15 seconds to run from the garage, open the fence, go through the yard, and knock again at the back door. When I asked him what he did, he said he just left and never investigated. When he asked me and my parents about it later, Will denied doing it. Can't help but wonder if he would have found anything on the other side of either door. My mom told me about the time our glass candy jar broke. We always had a small ornate jar we used for small candies and other treats. It would sit in our living room. It was nice if you wanted to just grab an M&M or something while hanging out. And was hit with our friends as teenagers. One day, my mom walked in the door and found the jar shattered in its spot on the table. She always got home before my brother and I were back from school, or my dad was back from work, so it couldn't have been any of us. We had a big dog with a tail that could easily knock it over. But if he had done it, the glass would be on the floor, if it even managed to break in the carpet. I've read about glass breaking from sitting in the sun, especially if it's already damaged, but I find it hard to believe that the spot it sat in would get nearly enough sun to do something like that. It was shaded for most of the daylight hours. My mom simply cleaned up the mess and moved on despite the strangeness of it. I'm beginning to think all of these aren't just coincidences. I'm visiting my parents for the summer, staying in the spare room in the basement. A couple of nights ago, me and my mom were talking pretty casually in the kitchen. That's when we suddenly heard 3 to 5 loud, spaced-out bangs coming from the hallway. These were deep, clear physical hits, like somebody pounding on the wall with their fist, like the bangs from the haunting. My mom also heard it. I immediately walked through the house and checked every room, trying to see if something had fallen or shifted. I didn't want to overreact, but I wanted to be sure. Everything looked normal. Nothing was out of place, and the garage door was shut. After that, I headed downstairs to go to bed, and not long after I got into the room, my daughter said she saw my mom standing outside her back room door, walking back and forth. She said she heard footsteps. She assumed it was her grandma, but when I checked, my mom wasn't there, hadn't been anywhere near that part of the house. A short while later, my dog kept just going to the door and smelling and looking at the door, tail up, like cautious. And he also, whimpered half the night, but never barked. Then, around 4 a.m., an old motion sensor alarm in the basement bathroom suddenly went off. It was plugged in upside down and hadn't been in use for years, but it let out a loud alarm like somebody had triggered it, which sent me into a spiral. Got very little sleep that night, just a heavy, scary feeling. The next morning, my dad got onto me for leaving the garage open, but I hadn't. I had just walked through the house the night before and the door was closed, so it must have opened sometime after I went to bed. Then that evening, around 8:45 p.m., my dad called down to me and said, "Something's burning in your room downstairs." Me and my mom both looked at each other, and I ran downstairs, and the entire basement was full of smoke. I called the fire department, and they confirmed the ceiling fan motor had completely burned out and heated up a wire in the ceiling, which caught fire. It wasn't in the room I was staying in, but the room next to it. And all of this happened within about 48 hours. And today is day 3. Nothing else I've noticed since last night. Added to mention, my parents have lived here for 34 years and built the home. Not on any ground worth mentioning. This is the first time my parents have ever encountered something like this, and they are definitely spooked. Star falling into my room. Please help me understand. When I was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, I had this thing happen to me that I think about all the time now. I completely forgot it for years, really forgot. Till recently, it just came out of me while I was talking. And now I can't stop talking about it. It was real, and I know it happened. I was in bed with a tooth underneath my pillow, waiting for the tooth fairy. I always sleep in my stomach, but this time I'd flipped onto my back because I was waiting for my dad to come and tuck me in. I remember being really excited. I was not sleepy. I was wide awake watching a sliver of sky I could see from my window. Just a little strip between the storm blinds and the neighbor's house. Not a big view, just enough to see a single star. I was staring at that star, and then it started to fall. It began small, like it was way up in the sky, but it got bigger as it came closer, like a glowing orb. Not perfectly round, more like a pulsing, glowing, spiky or round shape that stretched larger as it got closer. And as it got bigger and came toward me, I heard this buzzing sound. Not loud, but definitely there, like a hum. Like something electrical but soft and, very soft. The sound's not the important thing here. The sound was like almost to cover the sound of anything else in my reality as the light was getting closer. I was completely frozen. I couldn't move, not even blink. But I wasn't scared, I was just stuck, watching this happen. The star got bigger and bigger until it was huge, and it came through my window. It didn't break anything, it just entered, like it phased into the room. The light completely took over my vision, and I couldn't see my bed, the walls, or anything. Just pure white light. Total whiteout. It's like it entered me. Then suddenly I gasped and I sat up like my whole body jolted upright. And time had passed because the dollar was under my pillow and the tooth was gone. My dad wasn't in the bathroom anymore like he had been when I first lay down. I'd seen the light under the door and heard him washing his hands, but now it was quiet and it was done, and I'd missed it. But to me, it felt like no time had passed at all, like the whole thing was maybe an instant. I grabbed the dollar and I ran to wake up my dad, telling him I saw the tooth fairy, because that's what I thought it was at the time. That was how my little kid brain tried to make sense of it, but he said, okay, brushed it off. But I know I wasn't asleep. I was awake and excited and watching. This wasn't a dream, it really happened. The only other time I've seen something shaped like that, this featureless glowing being or presence, was when I was 16. I had this dream where I floated into a different place. It was like sky above the sky below. I was just drifting inside of it, very surreal and dualistic. There was this massive wall of light, and from inside it something started walking toward me. It didn't have a face or arms or features, but I knew it was a being, and it just pushed me back and said, not yet. That was all. Then I was suddenly back in my body again. The shape of that thing, the way it moved forward and how I just couldn't resist it. That's exactly what this light star thing felt like as I entered my room. Not threatening, just undeniable, like it was coming no matter what. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it happened to me. Didn't even remember it happened until very recently. I guess I tucked it away. Told maybe one or two people, but it came back online about a year ago, and I'm so curious to understand what it meant for me as I'm learning to understand myself. So I just want to know, has anybody ever had something like this happen to them? A star falling from the sky, getting bigger and entering your room, filling it with light and then just being gone. No vision, no message, just that. Not astral projection, not sleep paralysis. I'm talking about a star falling into your room at night. Only the sticky green ones on the ceiling, for me. The Pale Human, a personal experience. This happened in the early 2000s. I was walking up the street with my sister one day. It was when we were kids. And up our road, there used to be this karate school behind a small plaza, still there as of today. When we were walking by it, we noticed this great and small cellar door that was between some flowers. It was planted in front. We both decided to open it up and to see what was down there. When we did, we noticed a pale person sitting down below with their head tucked between their knees. They were covered in cobwebs, and I noticed also that they were completely hairless. We called down and asked if they were okay, and when we did, the quote-unquote person looked up at us slowly. I felt my heart drop when I noticed they had no facial features whatsoever. Eyes, mouth, nose, eyebrows. I also noticed they were slowly becoming more pale and luminescent. My sister went pale and screamed as she had started running away. I closed the grate and ran as well. Eventually went back there, and when I did, I saw down there was just cobwebs and nothing else. Until this day, I still question what it was that I saw. A couple of things to add. We were young and didn't have phones at the time. It was later in the day, so nobody was around. We told her mom, but she didn't believe us, really. The hole was about maybe 10 or 11 feet deep and cave-like. I went back there years later with my best friend and uncovered the grate, and at this point the karate school was shut down, and there's now dirt covering the grate tub. When I looked down, it still looked the same, but no cobwebs or anything. The spiders got evicted. Rent was too high. My ghost story. I still get chills thinking about what happened during my senior year of high school. It all started with this rumor about our school theater being haunted. I know. Haunted theater, a tale as old as time. But I swear, this is at least my experience. When I was going through the theater program, older students used to talk about a ghost circle. A circle drawn in chalk on the backstage wall. They said it was there to bind a ghost, and everyone was warned never to break it. No one ever explained exactly what would happen if you did, but even the skeptics wouldn't mess with it. The summer before my senior year, the school started remodeling the theater. They repainted the entire place, including the wall with the ghost circle. Painted right over it, as if it never existed. And that's when the strange things began. Almost immediately, weird stuff started happening. The janitor, usually very professional, suddenly refused to clean the theater at night, wouldn't go near the prop closet anymore. She seemed genuinely spooked, and the prop closet would make banging noises like pipes clanging. But the moment somebody opened the door, the noises stopped. Props would disappear or turn up in odd places, and there was often a shadowy figure on stage, which we tried to blame on the lighting. Never felt right. I got really curious after everything creepy started and did some research about the ghost story. Found out that a former student, deeply involved in the theater program, had died in a car accident years earlier, right before a show. Out of respect, I won't share more details about him, but knowing this added a whole new layer to the weirdness. The culmination of weirdness was during the senior show I was directing that December. Tech kept glitching and lights malfunctioned and sound cues failed. Things that worked perfectly for weeks in rehearsal started suddenly breaking. On closing night, the house lights refused to work, so I gathered up the cast and crew and we respectfully asked the ghost to stop interfering. The moment we did, the lights flicked on instantly, and I said, "Thank you," out loud, thinking it was polite. But looking back, that's probably when the ghost attached to me. After the show, my stage manager gave me a bouquet of flowers. I took them home and put them in a vase or a vase, whichever wording you guys fancy. I'm going with vase today. They put them in a vase on the kitchen table. I spent the rest of my night sat at the table talking with my aunt who was visiting, and after literal hours of chatting, 3 of the flowers suddenly slumped over at the same time. They didn't just bend, they looked like their stems had been cleanly cut, revealing the inside of the stems. I couldn't explain why or how it happened after they'd stood perfectly all evening. I didn't tell my aunt about the ghost then, even though it felt exactly like something we'd expect from the theater spirit. Weird things started happening at home. I slept in the finished basement where my bed was in the corner, and the doorways only had curtains instead of doors. Sometimes I'd wake up to see the curtains swaying and thought it was just drafts. Then one night I felt my bed dip behind me as if somebody sat down. When I turned around, no one was there. Later, my aunt stayed over again in another part of the basement. And one morning, she told me she thought the dog had jumped in bed with her. She felt something run up her body. But when she opened her eyes, the dog was... well, no dog was there. The dog had been locked upstairs all night. That's when I finally told her everything about the ghost. She suggested calmly communicating with him and asking him to leave me alone while I was sleeping. We kept it between us and didn't tell the rest of my family yet. Months later, one of my sisters had a friend sleep over. She and my sister shared a bed while my other sister slept on the ground next to them. The next morning, the friend said that the sister, who was supposed to be sleeping on the floor next to the bed, held her hand all night. She gushed about how sweet it was. But the sister denied this, saying she went back to her own bed early, didn't hold anyone's hand. The friend was so freaked out she never stayed over again. And eventually I told my family about the ghost following me home, and they shared their own experiences. One sister heard a loud bang one night and found a bag had fallen off a shelf for no reason. Another kept hearing noises from her closet that stopped whenever she opened it. But luckily, nothing was ever out of place. That was just the beginning. There were more strange incidents over the next couple of years, like noises and movements. Little things that still make me shiver. But then, almost as suddenly as it began, it all stopped, and it's been years now. I have no idea why the ghost left or what made him move on, and my family and I almost joke about him now. Like he was just some weird, invisible member of the household. Since then, nothing unusual has happened, and life's gone back to normal. There were a few other incidents that came to mind for me writing this post. I'll have to ask my family to remember the majority of them. It's not the scariest by any means, but I swear to everybody I know, we had a ghost for at least a few years. Strange activity in my home. Hi. I think my house has at least one ghost. It's very hard to tell though, because we are a family of ADHDers and have a bunch of pets. I'm writing this on my phone, so please forgive the formatting. For some background, I grew up in this house. My parents bought it from a family who bought it new in 1976. Only lived here for about 4 years. My parents rented it out to one family for about 4 years in the 90s before I bought it from them and moved my new little family back in. The neighborhood is built on an old limestone quarry. I've lived here for most of my life, except for a few years in my teens. As a child, I always felt watched, and I'd sit in my window at night and felt something in the backyard in the dark just watching. It wasn't scary, just present. There's also a central part of the house, between the hall and the garage and laundry room, that feels spooky. My sister corroborated the spooky feeling one time when she was visiting and told me about a time when she was doing laundry. She was overcome with the feeling of get out. In my previous marriage, we had a lot of my then-husband's family living here. At one time, there were 7 children under the age of 12. All of them were afraid of this area. Multiple adults have pointed out that it feels eerie there as well. Over the last couple of years, I've noticed more activity in the house. The notable things are, 1, phantom cat jumping onto the bed. I was working overnights at the time and would spend my off nights in a sleeping house. One night, I'm laying in bed with my now husband who was sleeping. I was browsing the internet when I felt a cat jump on the bed and walk between my husband and me, and then laid down. I put the beds up at night and keep them out of the room while we sleep. I thought maybe we missed putting one of them, so I shone my flashlight over to where I thought it was. Nothing was there. I felt around and still nothing. I hopped up and did a head count of pets, and everyone was accounted for. 2. Loud crashing of shelves to the ground with nothing out of place. For a couple of months, randomly, a loud crashing noise was coming from the office. And we have a bunch of shelves on the walls, and those shelves are full of crap. Collectibles and Legos and pictures and trinkets, so you get the point. So hearing one of those shelves come crashing down and stuff breaking and flying across our tiled floor was alarming. But when we'd go to check on it, nothing would be out of place, and this happened at least 5 times. I was not the only one to hear it, and I wasn't the only one to go check. I have a video from my security camera of the noise, and the camera was pointed at the puppy crate. 3. A hanging plant was torn from its place. I had some small succulents hanging in my window in the kitchen. One was a little guy in a swing hanging from twine. The twine was fairly substantial. It was in good condition that day when I checked the moisture level of the soil. I wish I had taken a picture of the twine after this happened, but I wasn't thinking of documenting anything yet. But as I was saying, in the early hours of the morning, the twine was pulled apart at all 3 supporting points, and my plant went tumbling. The most striking thing about this is that my dogs didn't bark, and if I set something down too hard in my nightstand in the night, my dogs will go off. But nothing here. It's like they were watching and the noise was expected. I have a recording of the noise, and the silence that follows, and I checked the video to see if there was a cat to blame, but none seemed to be over there when it happened. 4. Sunglasses go missing. They're later found in a reusable baggie in the sink. And this is a weird one that I can't figure out. I was alone at home and getting ready to leave for an appointment. I have to have my sunglasses to dry because daylight hurts my eyes, and as I was leaving, I opened my purse and checked for and saw my glasses and put my phone in my purse. Then I decided I should use the bathroom before I left. I set my purse down and went to the bathroom. Then I grabbed my purse and went to the door while digging for my glasses. Not in there. Stumped, I retraced my steps and I couldn't find them. I searched for a few minutes but had to go, and when I got home again, I searched again and found nothing. Like I said, I have ADHD, so I'll often lose something I'm holding, but can usually find it. I keep looking and getting rather frustrated. I eventually pull my husband in to help look. Nothing. I give up for the evening and I go do the dishes, and in the sink inside of a reusable sandwich bag are my glasses. And this weirds me out enough to review my security camera footage because did I put them in there? No, I saw on the tape where I put the bag in the sink the night before. I saw me searching for the glasses, and then when my husband and I were talking about where they could be, I saw the bag open by itself. Like the ghost was trying to help or something. Well, I don't know. Seems so strange. These are the most recent and, well, most my attention-grabbing of incidents. There's always something weird happening, but 99% of the time I can attribute it immediately to my ADHD or bad. I saw things as a child, and they're happening again. I grew up in rural Ireland, in a Jehovah's home. I was a young boy, around the age of 7 to 8, when I first started seeing things that supposedly weren't there. And most of my friends and family thought I was possessed and would lock me in my room for weeks when I started to act up. The first event is very blurry in my mind, so don't take this as completely accurate. First spooky event. It was around midday. My mother was in the kitchen. My father went to Dublin with a few of JW friends, which I'm assuming is Jehovah's Witnesses friends, to preach there. I was outside playing with my brother, probably soccer or tag, and he asked me to get a bottle of water for Mom, so I go in and my mother's lying on the ground with a puddle of blood around her. I screamed, kneeled down to her side and hugged her. Her body. Trying to figure what they wrote here. I could feel the heat from her body, the way the blood stuck to my skin, and my brother comes in panicked from the yelling. Asked what's wrong. I said something along the lines of, "Call Dad," before my mother walks into the room confused on why I'm on my knees crying. She's asked why I'm crying. I looked her and looked back, and the body's gone, and so is the blood. Second most fearful happening. It was about 11 or 12 then, and I had consistent hallucinations of one specific creature that called himself Bob. He was about 2.5 meters tall, had pale white skin with long arms that stopped at his knees. His head a light string of gray hair, but other than that he was bald. He always hand-ripped white hospital gown-looking thing. Bob mostly came in sleep paralysis, where he'd cry while facing the corner. But after a few months of this consistent appearance, I was watching TV. I got a sudden feeling of dread and fear. I looked behind me, and he was standing watching. This was the first time I'd ever seen his face, and he didn't have cheeks, and his mouth filled with huge teeth with small, fully black eyes. I jumped and quickly looked back, nor waiting to freak out. My different, in parentheses, brother, and he reached and grabbed my shoulder, and I stayed silent the rest of the day. and that night I slept under my bed, which is where I would sleep when I got scared at night, and haven't seen Bob till today. Current day, about 12 years after the last time I saw Bob, he has been watching me again, and he hasn't done anything besides stare and cry again. But I don't know what to do to really help stop these hallucinations. I don't want to see him anymore. They weren't dreams. I've had what I consider to be paranormal experiences off and on my whole life. And a lot of these stories I've shared with many people offline. I might share those later here, but they'll definitely out me to people who know me in real life. In the States, you have Girl Scouts. In Canada, we have Girl Guides. Age groups are 5 to 6 Sparks and 7 to 8 Brownies, and 9 to 11 are Guides. Well, when I was a Spark in the 90s, I remember we would sell cookies and chocolates to raise money for different things. Crafts and trips and stuff. During one such campaign, I have this vivid memory of my mom and I going door to door in our little town selling cookies. And I grew up in a really small town. We were set in from the woods a little, and a lot of the properties were heavily treed. We were a couple of streets away from home when I noticed a path between two houses that seemed to lead to a small house I'd never noticed before. The cedars and bushes around it sort of concealed the structure, so I could see a chimney with smoke coming out. I asked my mom if we could go to that house. She kind of looked at me funny and said that there wasn't a house there. Eventually, I convinced her to let me walk down the little path and see if anyone was there. If I wasn't 100% sure that I was awake, I'd think I was dreaming. Mostly because my mom let me go down that path alone. But truthfully, as a child, it probably seemed way longer than it actually was. Probably like 10 feet. I pushed past the bushes and saw a very crudely built structure that was built with green metal and tinted glass. It was bigger than a shed, but definitely smaller than her house. And as I'd seen at the road, there was a little chimney sticking out of the top of the structure. I made my way up to the rectangle of metal that I assumed was the front door, and as I approached, I could hear the sound of metallic whirring inside, like some sort of machinery was running. The air around the house smelled weird, like an organic smell that was wrong. I don't know how to describe it, and I've only smelled it maybe one other time in my life. Reached up and I knocked on the door and listened as the knock seemed to echo around the inside of the house. After a moment, I heard something inside the house knock back. Something in my little girl brain said, "Get the fuck out." I ran down back the road where my mom was waiting. I didn't know what I'd just seen, and I just told her she was right and there was no house there. Moved on to the next property. When my brother and I were little, sometimes we'd get sick enough to run a fever and we'd hallucinate, or have really vivid dreams, and sometimes acting them out in our sleep. I remember one time I was dreaming that I was playing basketball. I woke myself up sitting up with my hands in the air as if I'd just thrown the ball. One night, feverish, trying to sleep, but it had gotten to the time of night when my parents had gone to bed. The lights were off and the house was painfully silent. I started to hear a man singing. I was suddenly calmed and felt like everything was going to be fine, but there was a subtle feeling of unease underneath it all. The man singing seemed to get clearer in my mind, and I realized I was sitting cross-legged on the floor in a circle with other children, and the man sat straight across from me. He was singing and strumming an acoustic guitar, and I could smell that weird smell again. Organic and wrong. There were candles in a circle around us, and from there I finally faded off to sleep, but I was so creeped out the next morning when I remembered it. I don't know why, other than the smell, but these two memories seem to be linked. As I grew up, I seemed to misplace which roads the weird little house was, and never saw it on the path again. The man didn't remind me of anybody I've known or met, and it would be really easy to just say that these were only dreams and nothing more. But I don't know. They didn't feel like dreams. And if you're still hearing my voice, well, this, too, is not a dream. And if they leak in there, hope they're sweet ones. See ya. Are you ready to challenge your perception of reality? Paranormal M is here to push the boundaries of what we know. Subscribe and tap the notification bell to expand your horizons with our collection of captivating supernatural stories. Uncle's Encounter with a La Diablesse. La Diablesse is a character in Caribbean folklore. It's a human woman usually having an attractive body and clothing, but a hideous face, which she keeps hidden. She has one human foot and one cow hoof. She lures males into the forest so that they get lost and can never find their way back, so they end up dying either by getting eaten by a wild animal or by some other gruesome means. This happened in Trinidad in the 80s. My uncle was living in the house that I live in presently, my grandfather's house that my mother inherited. In those days, it was my grandparents and their 8 children. My uncle was one of the older siblings and would work late-night shifts, so he would return at home between the hours of 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Now, my street then wasn't as developed as it is now. There was a lot of bush and forested area, with a few houses scattered in between. My house is about a quarter mile in, and the road wasn't paved in at the time. It was kind of more of a track than a road. So one night when my uncle returned home from one of his late-night shifts, he saw in the distance a woman walking down the street. From the look of her clothing, he assumed it was my senile great-grandmother. She had a few instances where she would wander off and reach far places, so initially my uncle thought it was her. He saw her familiar dress and the white shawl that she always had draped over her head, and he could make out pieces of the tattoos that she had on her arms. Now, he thought it was strange. It was the latest that he ever saw her outside of her house, and was at least 10 minutes away from ours. He called out to her a couple times, but she didn't turn around and she just kept walking. At this time, my uncle decided to follow her and get back to her home. As he neared her, he realized something really weird. He kept calling out to her, and yet she didn't turn around. When he looked down, he saw that my great-grandmother had a cow hoof where her left foot should have been. He was really close to her now, and when he noticed it, the woman stopped dead in her tracks. My uncle, in sheer terror, turned around and said that he never ran so fast in his entire life. He raced on home, and since that incident, he's always had my grandfather wait up for him until he eventually left that job. Gwen tried to get me to play. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, located in the Caribbean. According to our folklore, a Gwen is the spirit of a child who died before baptism. They have no faces except for an O-shaped mouth, feet turned backwards, and a large hat. They usually lure children into the woods so as to make them lost and die. They also tend to be present at rivers and bamboo patches. Growing up, my grandparents and elder relatives would always warn me about them, considering that I live near a forested area and there's a river right behind my house. They used to say if Gwens heard somebody call your name, that they can take on the voices of those persons and use it to lure you in. I usually ignored their warning and would play close by the river by myself because I was an only child back then. One evening when I was about 10, I was in my hammock in the patio. And note that I had a clear view of the river and the bamboo patch from where I was. It was around 4 p.m. when I realized the atmosphere suddenly turned eerie. The wind stopped blowing. The trees were still as fuck. Not a sound could be heard from any animals. The street I live in became too quiet, and it was like it was frozen in time. While rocking in the hammock, I heard my mom suddenly call my name.
It was as if she was shouting, and she just kept calling me for 2 minutes straight until I shouted back, "All right, I'm coming." Now, this is where it gets weird. All the time she was calling, it was coming from the direction of the bamboo patch across the river. I was confused as to why my mom would be there, but my gut told me to check inside the house first. Walking through the house, I could still hear her calling me until I reached the back room and found my mom doing laundry. I asked if she was calling, and she said she never called me. I looked out the back door and the calling stopped. I asked my mom if she heard somebody calling my name, and she said she heard nothing. Since then, I stopped playing outside, and I never heard my name called again, at least not from the other side of the river. My dead ex-boyfriend visited in my dreams. I was a mess, wanted to die too, and just full sad that day and night. That's when I dreamt with him the first time. I told him I missed him, and he told me he missed me too. They told me he was pissed because his mom and aunt started giving away his stuff, then told me that he wanted me to keep his drum set. He was a drummer. But I told him I didn't want it, but I could keep a hoodie or something. He told me that he wanted no one to keep his drums, and I said sorry. I had no space to keep a drum set. Next day I went to his house and his mom told me that she wanted me to keep his drums. Told her the same, grabbed a hoodie, and she told me that he didn't want anybody else to have this, you know? I was weirded out but left. Next day, the house was robbed. Then they just took the drum set, a PlayStation, and some food. Weird. Then he came back a couple of times just to walk and talk. One of those times he told me that his mom and aunt were all creepy, logging to his Facebook and MySpace account. He was pissed again. I laughed and told him, well, maybe it's their way of dealing with all this. He told me he didn't care but wanted me to change the passwords. I laughed again and told him that I wasn't going to do this, but insisted, gave me the passwords and told me what the password that he wanted both accounts to have. It was just random numbers and letters. Days passed and I haven't dreamt about him in maybe a week or two. Funny thing is, I remembered the passwords. I'm easily distracted and I forget things in a matter of seconds. So I decided to do it. I changed the passwords to see if, maybe with this, he would come back in my dreams. I logged in and changed the passwords to the random numbers and letters that he provided. And just as I clicked save or whatever, I forgot those passwords. Days later, I went to his house and his mom told me someone changed his passwords. I felt really weird but said nothing. Last dream I had, we were laughing and talking. He told me that he wanted me to come with him somewhere. I guess it was a funeral. I asked who the funeral was for, and he just responded, "You'll see." As we arrived, they asked me to come to the coffin, and I went and saw. And as I looked down, I realized it was me. On that exact moment, I woke up and I was really scared. I don't remember how many time passed or how much time passed, maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe a week. I received a call from this aunt to let me know that his mom committed suicide. I was really sad as she was an awesome person, but she fell in depression. Her mom was recently deceased, and now her only son. I think I have a Civil War soldier protecting me. It started a few months ago. I want to say November, but I'm not sure. I'm a theater student at a pretty small school, in a smaller town, but it has a lot of history. Most notably, the college I go to is very old, and it used to be used as a Civil War hospital way back in the day, but that's beside the point. In November, my teacher had the idea to make some monologues based on some of the people who have passed in our small town. The role I was given was a soldier, a Confederate. His name was Abraham Jurganus. The monologue was that a friend of mine and we were playing these characters in a funny way. Abraham was mad that he didn't die in battle, and he was complaining about it. Him and several others died of smallpox. It was funny, but never sat right with me. That wasn't the weird part, though. One day, me and my girlfriend were bored and decided to go to the graveyard to find Abraham's grave, figure out more about him, and do some field research for the show. We get there and we go over to where the Civil War graves are, and I found him. His grave was renovated and looked considerably nicer than the others. I found out that he was private, which meant that he was no older than me, maybe even just as old as I am, 19. But I also realized that he died on Christmas Day, which is awful. But I kneeled down to put some flowers down and just said something like, "I respect you even though I'm playing you in a humor-like tone." I did it because, well, why not? And ever since that day, strange things have been happening. The first time I knew something was off was when I was driving with my girlfriend. It was late and we were just driving and talking. But I make a turn, and I see a man standing in the middle of the road. He was black, as in his whole body was black, like a shadow man. I looked at him, blinked, and he was gone. And I knew it was Abraham, like I sensed his presence. But the strange part is that my girlfriend bursted into tears out of nowhere. She said that it was an overwhelming feeling. She just felt so upset and hurt, and it's gotten even bigger from there. Now the weird part is that he's not hurting me. And whenever I see him, I don't feel scared or in any danger. I feel safe and calm, like he's my protector. And another thing is that our college is notoriously haunted, but all the spirits I've seen have been white, like a standard spirit, but Abraham is black. I just wanted to share this and get other opinions. Again, I can't stress this enough that he doesn't want to hurt me, or it doesn't feel like he wants to. I just want to know, like, why is he even here, I guess? Ouija at the park. One Sunday about last year, my friend Jake and I wanted to do something fun and interesting, so we thought about doing a Ouija board. I got a sturdy piece of cardboard and Jake put the Ouija letters on it. We both thought it would be super fun or something. We knew about the stories of how they stay in your home forever if you invite them, and so we went to a park away from our neighborhood and set it up there. My friend told me that we had to allow the spirit to control us in order to have it work. That sort of scared me. First, we would ask, "Are there any spirits who would like to talk with us?" We asked that about 15 times. It started to seem hopeless. "Let's just do it one more time, and then we should just go home," I said. We asked again, "Are there any spirits who'd like to talk with us?" And then Jake moved the circle onto the yes. Jake flipped out. I thought he was just being dumb because he didn't want to go back home. I was convinced that he moved it. "Dude, that's not funny at all. Stop moving it," I told him. He looked at me with a serious face and said, "I didn't move it. I thought you did." That's when I started to feel spooked, but it wasn't enough to get me away from there. "Okay then, I'll ask it something only I know," I said. Thought about my room. I had an old steelback iPod Touch at the bottom of my desk drawer, and I knew Jake didn't know about that. So I asked, "What is in the bottom desk drawer at my house?" And we spun the circle around on the board. It started to spell out I-P-O. I took my hands away and yelled, "Jake, did you go through my stuff?" He just looked at me in disbelief. "You're pranking me, aren't you?" he asked. That's when I realized this whole thing was real. "We're talking to a spirit?" Jake realized. Then we asked him a bunch of stupid questions, stuff like, "What am I thinking?" It would tell us correctly every time. We asked its name and it said, "John." Then we asked, "Are you a peaceful spirit?" It said no. Then we asked, "Do you want to hurt us?" The circle slowly moved to yes. "Holy frick, man," Jake said. "I don't want to do this anymore." Jake stood up, and I was glad that he said that because I felt the same. We tossed the board into a gated area and ran back to my house. On the way, we passed a person walking their dog. The dog barked at us like crazy. I've never seen a dog barking so badly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that spirit. I thought it was in my room. I don't know if I thought about the spirit enough to make myself feel it in my own home, or if it was actually there. It was only a hint of a presence that I could feel, so I was unclear. A week later, I couldn't feel it anymore, and to this day, April 24th, 2021, I haven't felt it again. Don't mess with Ouija boards unless you want to screw up your life. You must have gotten lucky. White figure in living room apartment. When I was in 6th grade, around 12 weeks in at school, my family and I moved in with my aunt, my mom's sister, only because my parents were going to invest in starting their own business, so this led to spending as little as possible and saving more. Things didn't work out between my parents and it led to a divorce. My mom got her own place and my dad was still renting a room from my aunt's apartment. I had been living with my aunt until I graduated from middle school, and it was just about time for me to enter high school until both my dad and aunt moved out and went their own way. This encounter occurred sometime between 2014 and 15. I was around 13 or 14. I'm just estimating since I don't quite remember the exact year and grade I was in at the time. Moving along. It was a weekend, the morning, and my aunt and her family were on their way to the church. I decided to stay home and not go with them since I always found church boring. No offense. "We'll be back later around the evening," my aunt said. As soon as they left, I put on Netflix. Relaxed, eating some chips with no worries in the world. I was watching Malcolm in the Middle, and I had my cousin's dog next to me on the couch sleeping. And eventually, a few episodes throughout the show, the dog decided to go into my cousin's room and sleep on his bed. As a habit, doors would always stay open from our rooms. A few hours go by as I'm watching the show, laughing, and suddenly my door slams shut. I assumed it was the air coming in from the window, but the odd thing was that I had my windows closed, so there was no way of the air coming in from anything other than the living room windows. I ignored it and said to myself, maybe I did leave the windows open, doubting myself. Shortly after, my cousin's dog starts barking for a quick 5 seconds and stops. A white ladylike figure appears from behind the wall, from the hall of our rooms. It was visible even though I was looking at it from the corner of my eyes. I ignored it and immediately thought that I was just tripping balls. Its head was becoming more visible as it was peeking. Skin was as white as paint with large black eyes and really long, wet-looking hair. I turned to look at it, and it hid. I go back to watching the show and once again peeks out once more. This time its hands were grasping onto the wall, and it showed its face up to its nose. Hands so white, fingers long and clear. At this point I looked back towards it again, hoping that it would just leave me alone. It hid. I immediately opened the front door and called my mom, letting her know what happened. She was so confused and told me that it was because I was behaving badly. She offered to pick me up and go to her house, but I decided to stay. I kept the front door open to feel some sort of security. My aunt and her family arrived around 6 p.m. I was afraid to tell my aunt what happened because I thought she would just laugh at me. But instead, she asked questions and was open to the whole situation. I've seen it too. She explained to me that she had heard footsteps and seen the figure staring at her from the kitchen when she would sleep in the living room quite a few times. And always early in the morning around 2 or 3. Consistent. As she explained to me her encounters, I felt comforted, I knew I wasn't crazy and I wasn't just seeing things. When we moved out, we found out that an old lady had died there. Maybe that explains this mysterious figure or demon. I've had numerous encounters with these types of figures in the past as a little kid, but to this day, this one has been the most recent one that's happened to me, and the second to scariest. We had the same nightmare. This was a story from several years ago, staying at a cheap hotel in New England while visiting family. Before I begin, it's important to know that I'm not prone to nightmares, and generally pretty skeptical about occurrences that are out of the ordinary. The hotel room was closer to an apartment in some ways, with a full kitchen and a couple of chairs arranged in some attempt in a sitting room. It wasn't exactly clean. The floor tiles were sticky, and the windows sat streaked with grime. One large stain in the carpet was the color of dried blood. Murder Hotel, we kept calling it. But really, we didn't care. We were 15 and ecstatic to have a space away from our parents. After spending the day with family, we settled into the queen beds along the far wall of the room. There was no overhead light, and I remember how different the room looked in the glow of the sickly yellow lamps. Chills ran down my legs when I turned my back to the kitchen, but I didn't think much of it. I was a paranoid kid who read scary stories in the daytime but still slept with the nightlight. I decided that I wasn't chicken, and that there was nothing to do but ignore the feeling. After tossing and turning a little, I fell asleep, reassured by the sound of my sister snoring from the other bed. I was standing in the parking lot of my hometown's shopping center, alone except for a single figure in front of me. Whatever it was took the shape of a man. He was middle-aged, greasy brown hair hanging loosely around his shoulders, padded with flannel. Patches of gray flooded his poorly kept beard. His clothes were expensive, clean, and crisp, as though tailored for a special occasion. But the presence wasn't human. He felt hollow. Like under that skin was a cavity of slime and rot and darkness that lives in the space between the stars. The man turned to enter the building behind him, but before he could, dozens of creatures spring out from the shadows, sinking jaws into flesh and tearing claws into ironed clothes. I think they were dogs, black dogs, with an intelligence burning behind bright red eyes. They tore his body apart, snuffing out the darkness and the orange streetlights behind them. My stomach turned as I watched, and I felt hot blood splash across my face. The man cried out with an inhuman scream. Organs collapsed into messes of purple and red, and skids sloughed away like wet paper. I wasn't able to look away. I woke up in the chalky darkness of the hour before dawn. I clung to the sheets, kicking my legs, trying to shift myself away from the lull of sleep. The air in the room was heavy and cold, just as it had been in my dream. It felt like something wasn't right, so I buried my head in the sheets and waited until morning. We stayed at the hotel for 2 more nights. Each time I closed my eyes, it was the same man, standing outside of a familiar place, and each time the dogs were there, waiting to tear him limb from limb. I began to dread sleeping, but even the dream seemed safer than the alternative of lying awake. As we packed on the last morning of our stay, my sister mentioned that she had been having nightmares as well. She doesn't remember as much as I do, but she was equally terrified that there were no dogs in her dream. There was the man, the exact same man. I don't know who lived in that hotel room before us, or what making in the dark. It's possible that something terrible happened there, or that I gave myself a bad dream and simply missed my own bed. I think if the man had been allowed to go inside the buildings, we wouldn't have been safe. I haven't seen or heard from either of the entities in the dream since. I think I can live with that. Lights in the woods. This happened a couple years ago when I was working at my childhood summer camp. I've certainly gotten strange feelings around the area before, but nothing especially malevolent or frightening. My coworker and I were taking our group for a sleep out, up in some shelters about half a mile into the woods and away from the rest of the camp. I'm used to being in the woods, and I generally don't scare easily, even at night. So when I woke up in the wee hours of the morning, I set out for the latrines without a second thought. I figured it was maybe around 4 or 5 a.m., based on a red glow on the horizon. The light fell softly through the trees, illuminating the path and the color sides of the shelters. The walk was only a few hundred yards, but felt longer with only my flashlight. I was about halfway there before I heard something behind me. Again, I know those woods. I know what most animals in the area sound like. From the camp's horses to the local family of black bears. Whatever this was, it was huge. Its presence seemed to close in on me from all around, and I could hear twigs snapping, vines tearing, mud squelching underfoot. I'm not fast, and I knew that running on the uneven path in the dark wouldn't get me far. So I walked. I walked like I owned those woods, slowly and deliberately until I reached the light on the side of the latrine. The presence has faded. I was even starting to feel good, confident, like I could keep going, keep walking through the dark woods until I reached the sunrise. I had to tell myself to stop, to turn where I meant to turn, and I eventually returned to my shelter and I fell asleep. Maybe I would have forgotten about it all, if not for that sunrise. I've watched so many sunrises over the lake. I should have known better. That red light in the woods wasn't in the east, where it should have been. It was out by the western side of the pasture, blood red, and a little too bright from what I was pretending to be. The more I think about it, the more it felt like I was being herded somewhere. I haven't met anyone with a similar experience, but my friends have theories from fairies to alien abduction. I'm not sure what I believe, but I'll never go to that part of the woods alone ever again. My Nan's last bathroom break. In December of 2018, I got a message from my stepdad that my Nan had been taken to a hospital with pneumonia. The second I read the message, I called him to ask what was going on, and he told me that she'd been a few days. She wasn't doing too good. I immediately got myself showered and dressed and then went straight to the hospital to see her. When I got to the hospital, I went straight up to her room and saw her lay there, and it broke me. More than I've ever been broken before. She looked terrible, thin, weak, barely holding on. I broke down and I just had to leave the room as she was still somewhat conscious of what was going on. She even thought that she was going home that day. My mom and stepdad were just looking after her and trying to do what they could do to help her. I spent a few hours there talking to her, but she couldn't even really respond back. But I have a couple things that she did say, that she needed the toilet, and of course, she could go to the toilet when she liked, given the situation. I head home later on and head to bed. I wake up the next morning and I tell my parents that I'll take over watching her so that they can go home and sleep. I don't remember what time I get there, but my uncle's there, and it's late at night, something like 10 p.m., and he stays and chats for a bit, then leaves. I thought, at least. After he leaves, I just look at my Nan and I wish I could talk to her and just tell her the things that I wanted her to know. Not sure if she could even hear me if I tell her anyway. I turn away briefly and check my phone, and there's something missing in the room. I don't hear my Nan's breathing anymore. I start crying again. I love my Nan greatly, and I wait till she passes on, call my uncle and tell him. He comes back because he's not too far away. And he'd not left long. It had only been like an hour since I saw him last. And by this point, we told the nurse. She says that we have to wait as the doctor was busy. A bit of time passes by, and the doctor comes in to declare her death, etc. And we were told to wait outside the room, so we leave and wait. While waiting, I'm talking to my uncle and partner. My partner's been with me the whole time. And we see someone walk by us and head to the toilet outside my Nan's room. They close the door and the light comes on. A few minutes go by and the door is opened slightly and no one comes out. And the light goes out. I go to check and, well, there was no one there. We all look at each other confused as hell, as we all saw the exact same thing. So my Nan decided she needed the toilet before going on to whatever awaited her next. Backseat native. I'd say around 2004, a friend of mine decided to move out to Seminole Indian Reservation and bought a house in town called Naples, Florida, off of DeSoto Boulevard. At the time, this road was a narrow dirt road, and only a few homes off of said road. Middle of nowhere, and deep into the woods. Beautiful home, just very secluded. We decided to have a housewarming party, which lasted well into the next morning. I was the guy that got to the party first, and was usually the last to leave. I'd say that there's about 20 of us. I was spent and decided to leave around 3 a.m. or so. So I said my goodbyes and I took off, starting my journey down this dirt road. Mind you, no street lamps, and you're literally in the middle of the bush. At the time, I was really into cars, and one of my favorite upgrades was the audio system. Highs, lows, and mids. Thousands of dollars worth of audio equipment. Young and dumb. Anyhow, I'm driving down this road at about 30 miles an hour, windows down, music annoyingly loud. I got about to the halfway point of my journey, and I felt a slight push against my seat, almost as if a small child kicked the back of the seat. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, it's a dirt road, and I have about 15-inch subwoofers in my trunk, so I lit up a smoke and turned down the radio. I started to feel a bit uneasy, a funny sort of feeling when someone's staring at you. But given my surroundings, it was understandable, so I just kind of kept convincing myself that there's nothing to worry about and to just keep driving. After about 5 minutes, I felt another slight push against my seat. And at this point, I decided to slow down and look into my rearview mirror. Nothing but a giant cloud of dust, with sort of a red from my taillights reflecting off the dust. I decided to take a quick look into my back seat, and what I saw will never leave my mind, and I'll never forget. It was a white face, no eyes and a mouth slightly open. I slammed on my brakes and jumped out of my car. Now picture yourself in my shoes, dirt road, alone, and just witnessed something in your back seat, and the only light is coming from the very thing that you're supposed to feel safe in. I'm panicking at this point. Smoke's cell phone is in the car. After about 10 minutes outside of my car trying to collect myself, I decided to approach the car. And of course, nothing was in the back seat. So I cautiously just sort of jumped back into my car and floored it. Grabbing my cell phone, trying to call anyone that would answer. And of course, no phone service. I didn't care about the speed limit, cops, or anything else for that matter. After about 20 minutes of recklessly driving, I got home. My mother was in the living room as I ran into the house. And she said the most appropriate thing possible when she seen me. "You looked like you've seen a ghost." I was pale white from head to toe. I sat down on the couch and told her about my little encounter. Like a good mother, she waited till I got home before she went to bed. So a few hours later, no sleep, I went back to my car to check for any damage. And of course, the back seat, nothing was out of the ordinary. I decided to go to my friend's house, who was also a Seminole Indian, and explain what was happening earlier that morning. After hearing the story, she explained that years ago her great-great-uncle was killed on that road by a group of men who didn't take kindly to Seminoles or Black Americans. This happened in the 1940s, and all the police found was a body that couldn't retrieve the head. She thinks his spirit haunts that particular road, and Apparently, this wasn't the first time that this happened. Others have had similar encounters while driving on that road. The road is DeSoto Boulevard, North Naples, Florida, near the Avenue of Maria University. It's paved now, and tons of homes are currently built in the area. I've tried to find police records, but in those days, in the Deep South, not very many incidents were documented, especially that of natives or Black Americans. Dead in the water. My grandparents moved from Ohio in the late 70s to start a life in Florida. An opportunity to manage a ranch was a dream come true for them. When I was about 8 years old, I used to visit them once a month for about 2 weeks each stay. Loved it. The smell of cow manure brings me to a special time in my life, but also brings me back horrifying memories. This ranch is located in Florida. I don't want to give you the name of the ranch for obvious reasons. Not much history was given to my grandparents before arriving. Shortly after, the owner started to spill the beans. Bound by contract, my grandparents had an obligation to stay for the span of 10 years. The land had some native history as well as an unfortunate suicide in the front house of the property. An old Navy sailor hung himself several years before, and the land has several different ponds and trails, which made for awesome adventures. I had lots of fun until my strange experience. My father and I decided to go fishing at one of the more interesting ponds, and at the time I had no idea what made this pond interesting. Later, when I was an adult, I was told why. The pond was shaped like a donut and had a small mound in the center of the pond, around 40 feet from the shore from all. It was perfectly centered. From my understanding, someone was buried at the center of this pond. I'm not sure if this is true. Mostly stories, no real evidence. Anyhow, my father began fishing, grabbed my small bait caster-sized rod, and began to hook a worm to my hook. I used a little red and white bobber too. I was the type that wanted to fish away from anyone, as I thought it would raise my chances of catching something. But that day, something caught me. I cast my line in the water and sat down right at the edge of the water with my feet slightly in there. I felt like a man with rubber boots like my old man. After about 20 minutes or so, I noticed my bobber going under and back up, so I decided to set my hook. As I tugged back, it felt like something big was on the line. I tugged and reeled, tugged harder and reeled my line, but it wouldn't let go. I was stuck on something. At this point, my father was on the other side of the mound and out of my sight. So, in big boy fashion, I decided to walk into the water to see if I could tug it in a different direction, possibly freeing my line. I'm about 4 feet in, and the water was just at the edge of my knee-high boots. I'm not sure if this made sense, but I felt like it was what I was supposed to do. Finally, after tugging my line even harder, it was freed as if nothing was in it in the first place. And even my worm was still hanging on the hook. Feeling proud, I decided to walk out in the water and recast my line. This is where it gets crazy. So about 1 foot away from my foot forward to catch my balance, and a smaller stone dug itself into my shin of my left leg. Hurt like hell. As I realized what just happened, I go to pull my left leg forward, and I couldn't. I felt my foot pulling back. I struggled trying to pull my leg forward without spinning around. With the bum now in the water, I started to scream, yelling for my father, and it was like my scream was falling on deaf ears. I'm being pulled into the water by something. Didn't feel my hands or anything actually on my foot. Just my leg was not free, and I was gradually going further into the water. I was yelling bloody murder at this point, and after 20 seconds of fighting and yelling, whatever had my foot let go. I was soaked and horrified. I ran to my father screaming, bleeding from my left leg, and in somewhat of a shock. While yelling, I asked my father, "Why didn't you come when I was screaming?" My father now shaking because of my reaction. "Son, I didn't hear any screaming. I couldn't even see you from this side." I'm Calming down a little bit at this point, I asked him again. His reply was the same. "I didn't hear you, son." Needless to say, after showing my father and explaining what happened to me, like most parents would, just shrugged it off and said my imagination got the best of me. I never fished on that property again. No one believes this actually happened. And trust me, this is something that sounds outlandish. Hitching a ride. About 15 years ago, a friend and I decided to have a night out at a local club in Fort Myers, Florida. It was around 2:30 a.m. when we decided to leave and head back home. To get home, we had to take a State Road 82, about a 45-minute drive from the North Fort Myers. If anyone on this thread knows anything about 82, hundreds of deaths have happened on this road, from motorcycle accidents to semi-truck rollovers and everything in between. Extremely dangerous road, with a ton of very strange sightings. Anyway, it was around 3 a.m. when we reached the halfway point home. Windows halfway down, smoking cigarettes and listening to some Pastor Troy, when out of the blue we heard what sounded like very heavy rain hitting our car. No other cars around and driving about 70 miles per hour. No rain in sight, just a bit foggy. Startled the hell out of us, and it lasted for maybe a second, like we drove through a very tiny rainstorm. We looked at each other and just sort of shrugged it off and kept driving. If you've ever driven down State Road 82, it's not exactly the safest road to pull over if you don't really have to. So we finally reached home and decided to fill up the car and purchased a couple of packs of smokes. I parked next to a pump, and my buddy went to the store to go pay for the fuel and smokes. When I got out of the car, I decided to just check the car and see if I maybe hit something. And honestly, people laugh at me when I tell them this story, but from the middle of the front of my hood all the way back to the end of the trunk, I seen 8 streaks. I was a car guy in those days, and my car was washed and waxed hours before we decided to go clubbing. My buddy came out of the store. I showed him what I discovered, and he was equally puzzled. After I pumped gas, I decided to go over to the self-car wash and see if I could get these streaks off the car. Let's just say I spent damn near $15 in quarters using everything that was setting that car wash had to offer, and the streaks just wouldn't come off. I said the hell with it and decided to drop Buddy off and head home to bed. The next morning, I decided to go have a look at the car. I just couldn't figure out what the hell could have caused this. I'd drop over to my grandmother's house to have breakfast, and I decided to let her know what happened. My grandmother is an old Latina woman who's very superstitious and knows quite a bit about Santeria. After I told her what happened, she stood up and went into her bedroom. When she came back into the kitchen, she had white sage, holy water, a rosary, and a small piece of silver. I chuckled and asked if she was about to perform an exorcism. She smiled and said, "Kinda." So I walked outside with her and her items. She surrounded the car with white sage inside and out, held her rosary in one hand while whispering something. She put holy water on a small rag that she had in her pocket and proceeded to clean my car. I laughed and told her I tried pretty much everything to get those streaks off, and nothing worked. And she's now cleaning the streaks off with holy water. My jaw dropped. The streaks were coming off. I was honestly shocked. After she cleaned, quote-unquote, my car, I asked her what she thought it was, and she said that it was a demon trying to latch itself to my car. To this day, I'm still haunted by this and wonder if she was actually right. Past life dreams. I tend to have dreams where I feel strongly connected to one of the characters in the dream. All these dreams involve past life events. I recall a dream where I was just a small girl in an Indian village. I had the feelings that maybe it was back centuries ago. I had a dream where I was traveling along a river. Suddenly, we were ambushed, and I was shot in the chest with an arrow. I felt myself rising up quickly and looked down to see the boat getting smaller and smaller. As I rose up, I saw the landscape laid out below me. It was a great plain with a forest in all directions as far as I could see. I had the feeling it was Russia, but I'm not sure when. I remember one where a man on board a sailing ship, dressed in the style of an 18th century. Another dream was me and a lady friend walking along the southern coast of England, above the white cliffs of Dover. I had the feeling that this was in the early 19th century. I had a very odd dream a few years ago where I was a soldier making my way through a sewage system. I was surrounded with bodies floating in the water, which came up to my knees. I had no fucking feeling of fear or even revulsion during the dream. It was just a matter of pushing the floating bodies out of the way so I could get through to safety. I think these dreams might all be connected to past lives that I've had. That's the only way I can explain why I feel so connected to the individuals in the dreams. I've had a number of other dreams of this type, but that'll do for now. That'll do. Did I invite something into my apartment? My first post here, but I felt the need to share, lest I go crazy. I've been a paranormal / witchery follower for my entire life. It's interesting, and it's led to quite a few minor experiences. My mother, who's had many more experiences and has more knowledge than me, always warned me not to mess with things, and until now, I really hadn't. As a short background, I recently moved into my own apartment, and I've been super stressed due to uni life. Looking for a way to de-stress, I was scrolling through TikTok and found a video about manifesting by putting yourself into a trance-like state and willing a connection. It honestly seemed like a good idea at the time. I did it, nothing happened, but I felt calmer, so I continued for a few weeks. A lot of the time with nothing specific in mind, just putting myself in a trance and reaching out. One time I felt a sudden sharp pain in my wrist that snapped me out of it immediately. No outside injuries, but it continued to hurt throughout the day. After that, things started getting weird. Phantom pains throughout the day. My plants suddenly began to flourish, then die, especially all my sage. Strange noises like hearing my cat despite him not living with me, or randomly smelling smoke, often coupled with the noises. But weirdest or worst is when I go to bed. As I began to drift into a place between sleep and wakefulness, I become acutely aware of a feeling of someone sitting at the end of my bed, and I swear I can almost see a silhouette. I'll get a burning feeling in my legs, like something hot's being held against them. Sometimes it's widespread across my whole calf, or it's just smaller pricks around my knees. Once it even felt like something wrapped around my ankle and pulled along with the sound of laughter. Being alone, this is something that's actually starting to creep me out. I don't know if I'm just connecting weird separate occurrences, though. I thought it was sleep paralysis. My family would often move due to my dad's job. We lived in around 9 different states, sometimes moving houses within them. When I was 6, we had moved to Wisconsin in an older Victorian home that we soon found out was once the only house on what used to be a large farm until someone decided to turn it into a small town. On the first year I had fallen asleep with my mom in the living room, I had woken up at about 1 a.m. There was a clock on the opposite wall that the TV was on, and I had seen that it was about 20 feet away. On the bottom of the stairs was a woman. She stood about 6 feet tall and had long black hair and wore a black and white striped dress that covered her feet. Her face wasn't visible. I panicked but couldn't move. Took about 5 minutes of squeezing my eyes shut to fall back asleep. I would wake up with small bruises on my arms and legs, but thought nothing of it. The same thing happened nearly 2 years later before we moved. However, I was asleep in my bedroom and I saw her in the hallway, still not moving. I woke up that time with bits of my hair cut around my head. I remember thinking it was my sister until she denied doing so, causing huge upset within the family about her abusing me, which wasn't true at all. Now, we had moved to Kansas in a rather nice two-door style house. Yeah, my parents like older homes. And if it was older than 80, yep, we had to live there. I was nearly 11 when I, once again, fell asleep on the couch with my mom. The house was smaller, so the living room was a bit cozier with the fireplace and stairs on one side and the den on the other, maybe 10 feet. I opened my eyes and again, she was at the bottom of the stairs, slightly illuminated by the streetlight outside. The next morning I woke with a migraine, the one and only I've ever had. It was only me, 2 of my sisters, and my parents at the time. Then 5 years later we moved to Florida in a rather new home, which was odd for my parents. Just one sister with us this time. Within the first month she appeared again. I still couldn't move or speak. All I could do was stare. She was in the doorway, maybe 6 feet away, watching me, wearing that same dress. The next morning I had cuts on my breasts and neck. After we moved house about 4 miles away, it was one of the last times I ever saw her until a few weeks ago. She was at the foot of my bed, her face still covered, but I could almost see her breathing. I woke up untouched and came down with a nasty stomach a bit later that day. The last time I saw her, my parents and I just moved back from my childhood home in Michigan. It was my grandparents before they left. I had a room in the basement and I was rather happy with the setup. That was until exactly 1 year after I moved in that I sort of experience her. This time I refused to open my eyes. Tired of being afraid, but I could hear her. She was right next to me, breathing in my ear. She didn't say anything at all, just breathed. The next morning I was unable to eat due to a nasty sore throat. See, I would assume this was just some sort of sleep paralysis, a demon or an overactive imagination. However, I still can't shake the feeling that something was or is here. I still get random bruises on my leg, and I take iron supplements, otherwise I'm very healthy. And I randomly feel nauseous when I'm alone and just before bed. It's something I've gotten used to, but I always get a creepy feeling on my neck when I'm alone. I still panic when my parents leave, and I sort of fill my work and school schedule as much as possible to avoid this. I don't see anything wrong with my surroundings. It only affects me. Anyone else visited by shadow figures not attributed to sleep paralysis? Starting when I was 19 up until my late 20s, I would be pulled from a deep sleep to find what appeared to be a humanoid standing above me at the side of my bed. It was completely black. Think of a void, and that's the color, or lack thereof. And it or they or whatever would be there. It happened multiple times over the course of a decade. A lot of times I would just jump into flight mode, my heart racing, and throw my blanket at it thinking it was an intruder, and that the blanket would distract them long enough for me to get the upper hand. But every time I threw the blanket, it would simply flop to the ground. I remember every time I saw it again, and I scooted back in bed until I was practically sitting on my ex-significant other's head. She was pissed off at that. After each experience, I would lay in bed until I calmed down and then sleep the rest of the night. I've also seen a swirling mass of shadows on the floor one night after waking up, but I chalked that up to a friend telling me about how he experienced that and my brain tricking me. This happened in different dorms and houses and apartments and states, so I don't know really what was happening. Hasn't happened in quite some time, which I'm thankful for. I also remember my friend from high school who has roots in Southeast Asia telling me that when spirits come to you at night, if they're at your bedside, they're just visiting. But if they're at the top of you, it's bad news bears. Luckily, I've never experienced the latter. I've always been attuned to supernatural stuff, and so that's how I explain it to myself. Dream about deceased best friend. You can always call me. 9 years ago, I lost a lifelong best friend to suicide. The years since have been difficult, but over time, I've made peace with it, and I've been doing all right. During the first few years following his passing, I had several very vivid dreams of him. While they could very well have been a product of mourning, they always felt more meaningful. I was always left feeling connected and reassured by them. About 2 weeks ago, I realized that I haven't had a dream like this in many years. It made me sad, but it seemed to make sense. His passing is no longer the main focus of my life, and still, I wondered if he was still out there, somewhere. A week goes by and I don't give the dreams another thought. Then it happened. I dreamt he was back as though he never left. I hugged him and told him how much I missed him. He said it was great to see me too, but that he's soon having to go away again. I begged him not to go, because that meant he would never come back. He told me, "You know how to get a hold of me. Call me when you want to talk." "I can't just call you," I replied. "You won't be in this world anymore." He firmly replied, "Just call me. You can always call me. I'll answer." And with that, I woke up, both heartbroken and oddly comforted. I felt like I finally got to visit him again after all these years. Perhaps it was just a dream, but to me, it felt like much more. Microdream or paranormal experience. I worked overnights for over a decade at a shelter for mostly mothers and children fleeing violence. Throughout my time working there, I would have clients sharing strange experiences that they've experienced. Meanwhile, it's a different group of people throughout the years, and all firmly believed that the house held a sort of energy or had apparitions dwelling there. I had a few questionable encounters myself. On 2 occasions, I literally felt someone standing immediately in my personal space to the point that hairs on the back of my neck would stand. And when I turned around to say back up, no one would be there. There was one experience in particular that left an indelible mark on my memory, and I'm uncertain if it was a microdream or a paranormal experience. Being that I worked overnight between 3 to 5 a.m., if all the folks were asleep, and I had done my rounds, I would relax in the office at my desk with the TV on. If I became groggy, I would rest my head on the desk for a few minutes at a time. But that would be enough to sort of awake any sounds, and they would jolt me out of the nap. On this particular shift, it was quiet, and all felt safe. I had my head on the desk and immediately began microdreaming. However, my dream was me sitting at the desk at work in the office, and seeing a woman slowly walk down the stairs past my office door. The ironic part is, in my dream, I knew that this woman wasn't staying at the shelter. I'd never seen her before. She was an older black woman dressed in her Sunday best, all pink, and her hat was indicative of 1920s or 30s era fashion. I remember in my dream thinking, I don't know her, but I feel safe with her. I won't bother her and I'll let her be. And then I immediately woke up to the same panoramic view outside of my office door I had just seen in my dream, and no one was there. Side note. Also, the shelter was an old mansion for very wealthy folk at the beginning of the 20th century. I imagine the apparition I saw or dreamt may have been a hired house help for the family who resided there initially. It became a shelter in the mid-70s. Very odd. I'll never forget this experience. And I often sort of just left to wonder if spirits are better able to show themselves and communicate through dreams than with the living. A compilation of life events. My earliest memory is roughly 4 years old. We lived in a very old house in a neighborhood where needles would stick to themselves on the sidewalks. Our laundry was an unfinished basement. To say it was creepy was an understatement. My mama used to take me with her to go do laundry. In fact, I can't even remember a time that she went by herself. She made it a game with me and would carry me in a laundry basket. She always teased that if I refused to take a bath, she would stick me in the washer with all my clothes. There was always a shadow on the wall, though there was nothing blocking it. If you looked at it long enough, you could swear you saw it move. Fear was a new thing at the time. I may have lived in a bad neighborhood, but my parents protected me. And honestly, that basement is probably the first time I ever felt uncomfortable or anxious. When we moved out, I remember my mother whispering to my grandma that she hopes Shadow Man doesn't follow. She never mentioned it to me as I'm a grown man now, but I still feel that basement has a lot to do with why we moved. Sometime during elementary school, my best friend, and we're going to call her Ash, oops, I think I might be a girl and I said I was a man, I apologize, lived in a perfect family. Pastor for a dad, kindergarten school teacher for a mom, a perfect family of 6. We were playing hide and seek at her house. We put the bedrooms as off limits. We could hide in the garage, the family room, living room, kitchen, and 2 bathrooms. When it was my turn to hide, I went to the top of the stairs and around the small corner and laid down flat next to her bedroom door. It was pretty dark, so I thought she wouldn't see me. As I listened to her to come find me, I turned my face toward the door and looked underneath it. I saw a face looking right back at me, human, but very pale with dark, sunken-in eyes. It was centimeters away from my own. I froze in fear, and we had a staring contest for what feels like forever. Then it blinked. I went home early that night. Ash's family moved to a new state about a month later. Their family plunged into hell. Her sister getting addicted to drugs and trying to commit suicide. Ash herself following in those footsteps. Her little brother ran away all the time, all of them hospitalized at some point for trying to OD or shoot themselves. We still talk, but it's never been the same. "2 years at a haunted apartment. I moved in with my fiancé when we found out that I was pregnant, around June of 2020. I worked as a baker for a local coffee shop and often worked 4 a.m. to 12 p.m. shifts. My fiancé worked a lot from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shifts. I spent a lot of nights alone. I've always been scared of the dark, but this made it even worse. September 3:45 a.m. My apartment was on the 2nd floor. The building was an old farmhouse that they turned into 4 small apartments. My fiancé and I were the only ones on the 2nd floor, while 2 older women occupied downstairs. There was a door to the basement where we did our laundry. Everyone always shut the door, and it was heavy enough that if you didn't prop it open, it would shut anyway. I parked out back away from the road, so I had to walk past the basement door. The hall lights were off, but I had my phone light, so I didn't mind. When I walked past the door, I noticed that it was about 4 inches open. I thought it was weird, but also not my problem. Just as I stepped out the back door, I heard the basement door slam shut. I blamed the wind. December 3:45 a.m. The doorbell ring just kept clicking on and off. Full charge. Kept showing me videos of an empty hall. It stopped when I grabbed the doorknob and never did it again. On and off, I noticed small things. Footsteps, soft tapping, things being moved around, lights that were on when I swore up and down that I turned them off. I blamed everything but what I feared. This last experience is the longest. Afterwards, we turned in our 30-day notice. April, sometime in the morning. My son was about a month old. My fiance had gone back to work and I was enjoying my infant cuddles. I laid him sort of swaddled in his crib while he slept and took a well-deserved shower. The bathroom light flickered and went out while I was in there, but the sunlight from the window was enough to continue. I was almost done and I was rinsing my face with water, and it got so unbearably hot. I pulled back when I opened my eyes and the shower curtain was completely open and the water was all the way on hot. I started to get scared and I got out of the shower. I wrapped myself in a towel and tried to calm down. Almost instantly, my son started screaming bloody murder. I ran to his bedroom and found his swaddle perfectly open. Not like he had kicked it open, but laying in a perfect square flat in his bed. As soon as I picked him up, all the lights in the apartment went out. None of my neighbors had this problem. I was terrified. Quickly got dressed and got my son in his car seat, went to my mom's till my fiance was off work. We kept hearing the knocking throughout our 30 days and spent the least amount of time there as possible. I still get anxious when I drive past the old place. An empty encounter. I just got done eating dinner at my parents' house. It was a typical Sunday, and the year was 2013, and I was 22 years old. My parents, sister, and my two nieces all left to go shopping, which left just my brother-in-law and me at the house alone. For years, whenever we got a chance to hang out alone, we would play Halo. We were in the last bedroom down the hall on the left, playing Halo 4 and just enjoying the bro time, when we heard something down the hallway. I guess this would be a good time to tell you that I have an identical twin brother, and at this time, he was away working in California. We haven't seen him in months. The noise coming from the end of the hallway sounded like a low beating, but quickly turned into what sounded like footsteps. We didn't pay much attention, thinking it was just my parents or nieces coming down the hallway, even though I thought to myself that it was oddly quick for them to be back. The footsteps were slow but continued to grow louder. I paused the game and my brother-in-law looked at me confused as to why I stopped it. I quickly held up my finger as to shush him and pointed at the door. We sat there looking at the door as the footsteps got closer and closer until they reached the outside of the door of the room where they were in, and they stopped. I was still not scared or shaken by this, since my nieces were young and my dad likes to try to scare us. I still just thought that's what it was. We sit quietly for about 30 seconds, and all of a sudden there's 3 beats against the door. It wasn't extremely loud, but it had an irregular beat to it, and it made both of us jump a bit. I thought it was weird that they knocked instead of walking in like they normally do. Still optimistic as ever, I was still thinking that they were just trying to scare us. I jump up smiling, thinking, yeah, you got us. As I walked to the door to let them in, but right before I got to the door, a voice said from behind the door, just loud enough for me to hear it, "Hey guys." I was taken back because the voice sounded exactly like my twin's brother voice. I stood frozen, only turning my head to look back at my brother-in-law, who was looking back at me with his jaw on the ground and the same look of shock on his face. He jumps up and runs to get behind me. I grab the door and quickly open it, excited to see my twin brother, who's decided to come home and surprise us. The door swung open, and we're hit in the face with a cool breeze and an empty doorway. We look down the hall toward the kitchen. Empty. We call out his name. "Dusty, is that you?" No response. We scream out for my mom, my dad, my sister, and 2 nieces, thinking maybe it was some sick joke, but nothing comes back. Completely freaked and now thinking someone has broken into the house, I run back into the room where we just grabbed a handgun that my dad kept beside the bed tossed my brother-in-law a large machete that we always kept in the corner to use for yard work and camping. Now with both of us armed, I clicked my weapon off safety, told my brother-in-law, "Watch my 6." And we won through the entire house like SEAL Team 6. We check every nook and cranny, yelling out, "Come on out. We know you're there." We don't find a thing. We ran to check the doors, the windows, all were locked and nothing was broken. We run outside to see if we can see anything. Nothing. We pull out our phones. I call my brother and he calls his wife. And that's my sister. My brother answers the phone. "Are you home?" I said. "No, I'm at work," he responded, confused. My brother-in-law just yells, "They said that you're still shopping." We told everybody what happened and everybody acted surprised. But, none of them believed us, even though, and to this day. Now sometimes when I sit and think of all this in my life, I even start to doubt myself and I ask, did that even happen? Was it real? But then I remember I wasn't alone and I call my now ex-brother-in-law and ask him if he still remembers the same thing. And every time he says, "Dude, I will never forget that day."